we all know last year Tennessee was very close to playing in the college football playoff. And if it wasn't for that fluke situation where Jeremy Banks started a fight with Hendon Hooker and then was suspended for the South Carolina game, at which point the defense collapsed against South Carolina and gave up 63 points, and Hendon Hooker suffers a season-ending ACL tear. If it wasn't for Jeremy Banks starting that fight, none of that happens, and Tennessee probably beat South Carolina. And if Tennessee beats South Carolina, they're in the college football playoff last year. No questions asked. It's them, Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia. Well, you would think they'd be a candidate to be a first-time participant in this year's college football playoff, wouldn't you? According to On3, no. And I like Matt Zenitz. He does a lot of great work with On3, and On3 is really like the rising site for college football. I'm a big fan of On3 and the work they do. But this list was just ridiculous to me and totally unfair. They named the three teams with the best shot at pushing for their first college football playoff appearance in 2023. One was USC. Okay, I get that. USC is in the Pac-12. They almost made it last year. They had a Heisman quarterback who is back. That they are probably the most likely team to make their first college football playoff this year. Another one is Penn State. And it's about, Penn State did go 11-2 last year. They probably have their best team ever. They could maybe, under James Franklin, that is, they could maybe sneak in an extra win. They were in it with Ohio State. I mean, it's not crazy to think Penn State, if they win one of those two games last year, they're in the playoff, and they may not, and they wouldn't even win the Big Ten. So it's very intriguing. If they win just one of those, you could theoretically see them finishing 11-1, not winning the Big Ten, but getting into the playoff. Okay, fine with Penn State. Now I'm going to lose my mind. Texas is on this list. Where is this love for Texas coming from? It is as ridiculous as the love for Florida State that is happening right now. Texas has proven absolutely nothing under Steve Sarkisian. Quinn Ewers is not a good quarterback. I believe he's going to lose his starting job to Arch Manning this year. And I think it's going to come relatively quickly, honestly. I think he's going to wilt beneath the pressure because fans are going to be wanting Arch Manning. Arch Manning is better. And Texas is going to have another transition year because of that. Texas, people need to stop acting like they're a playoff contender this year. They're not. They're not a top 10 team. They're not a top 15 team. Tennessee is better than Texas. The idea that you would have Texas on this list over Tennessee is absolutely ridiculous. Can we stop with this love for Texas and this love for Steve Sarkisian? It's driving me crazy. It's driving me crazier than the love for Florida State right now. Okay? They don't belong on this list. Now, two honorable mentions, funny enough, that I would actually argue belong on the list over Texas. What is Utah? That's fair. Utah just won the Pac-12 title. They knocked USC out of the playoff. Okay, I get it. It's basically just playing the Pac-12 slate gives them a chance. The other one belongs over Texas, but shouldn't be on that list over Tennessee. Okay, and it's Kansas State. And the belief is about the respect for Chris Kleiman as the coach, and that they could be the upstart team in the Big 12. They did beat TCU to win the Big 12 title last year. Totally fine. I have more faith in Kansas State than Texas because I think Kansas State is better coached in the Big 12. I do. I'm going to say it. I think they're better coached. I think Arch Manning committing to Steve Sarkisian may be maybe the first great mistake made by a Manning because they committed to the wrong coach, honestly. And I mean, the truth of the matter is, the Mannings have a pretty good, solid track record of committing to the right coaches. I mean, Archie Manning committed to Johnny Vaught, the greatest coach in Ole Miss history. Peyton Manning committed to not Philip Fulmer, but David Cutcliffe, the greatest developer of quarterbacks in history. And then Eli Manning committed to David Cutcliffe, who took the head coaching job at Ole Miss. Steve Sarkisian may be a decent developer of quarterbacks. I don't trust him in doing everything else right. So I think Texas is going to drastically underachieve. Arch Manning might carry them forward, but he's not going to be starting most of this year. So they should not be on this list. Kansas State should not be on this list. Tennessee belongs over both of them. If I'm doing this list, I'm going USC, Penn State, Utah. Fine with all of those. No issue there. All three. I'm actually going to take but I'm going to say that Tennessee should be on there too. Tennessee should absolutely be on there after those three. It should be those three and then Tennessee. I don't even know who the fifth one would be. I'm trying to think of who hasn't made a playoff yet that should belong. But it shouldn't be Texas or Kansas State. It should be neither one of those teams. Kansas State actually has a better case, but it shouldn't be them. I would honestly maybe even consider a group of 5 school at that point. I'm not even going to lie. So it's just kind of crazy. Rugged.Tom, great point that there are too many questions about both Joe and the offensive line. And I agree. I see Penn State before Tennessee. I'm fine with Penn State before Tennessee. I'm fine with Utah and USC just because the Pac-12, whoever wins the Pac-12, when you're looking at first team playoff bids, either one of them, it's more likely one of them wins the Pac-12 than Tennessee win the SEC just because of how much more brutal the SEC is. So I'm fine with those three, but I have to say that I think Tennessee has a better shot at the playoff than Kansas State or Texas. Even with the lack of faith in how good the Big 12 is this year, I think Tennessee has a better shot. Billy Bob Cruder makes a joke. If Vols can hold South Carolina under 63, he'll be happy. Welcome to the message boards, Billy Bob. And I think Tennessee has better goals than that this year. I will say that. But I will also say they should be on this list. I think Tennessee has the fourth most likely odds to reach the college football playoff of any team that hasn't reached the playoff before. Yes, I think Tennessee is fourth on that list. I'm going to be honest with you. And they should not be behind Texas. They should not be behind Kansas State. There are way too many issues with both, but I will say definitely shouldn't be behind Texas. That's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's insane that they're behind Texas. And Texas should not be on the most likely teams on the list. Kansas State should be above Texas. I think Texas is the second most overrated team in all of college football entering this year. Number one being Florida State. I'm going to continue to stick with Florida State. They are just going to be a total laughingstock disaster. I'm putting all my eggs in the basket of LSU absolutely obliterating Florida State week 1 this year. But luckily, Florida State wasn't on this list, but that would be because they've already made a playoff. They made one in 2014 and got tracked by Oregon, who also wasn't on this list because they again also made a playoff. I would consider maybe if we're, looking at preseason rankings, I don't think there's going to be any group of 5 team like Cincinnati this year. I think that one's a little bit, I think it's possible. I named Texas San Antonio, but I think it would just be a little too difficult. But if we're looking at teams, again, Texas most overrated team along with Florida State, the 2 most overrated teams in college football. USC, I get. Penn State, I get. Looking at the rest of them, though, it's Utah, I get. Again, I mean, after all these people, who would be the 5th? Maybe Ole Miss, maybe Florida, maybe Texas A&M if Texas A&M turns it around. Wisconsin, with the break of playing in the Big Ten West, there's a solid argument for that. Washington has actually been in a playoff. That's the crazy part. They've actually been in one. But after that, I'm not going to see Texas Tech, Baylor, Oregon State, UNC. None of those are realistic. So after, I think Tennessee, Utah, Penn State, and USC are okay. USC, Utah, Penn State are the clear-cut top 3. Clear-cut top 3. Tennessee is 4th in terms of teams most likely to make the college football playoff that have never made it before. Texas and Kansas State, theoretically, you could tie them for 5th. Honestly, but I mean, I'm looking at them on the same tier as Ole Miss at that point and Texas A&M. That's where I'm putting Texas and Kansas State. Maybe Kansas State a bit higher. You know what? Kansas State's 5th. Tennessee's 4th. Kansas State's 5th. Texas is on a tier with Texas A&M and Ole Miss. That's where I'm at with this. It's absolutely ridiculous that is the case. Everybody should be upset with it.